So I'm going to record and kick it off. So we're live right now. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to another ONOS TST meeting. Last week we were at the ONOS conference, so we didn't have one. And this week, Nikolai from inango system is going to present a proposal, a collaboration proposal for improving the mechanism for handling ONOS messages. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Nikolai.
Okay, then I'm starting. I am Nikolai Merinov, and I would introduce first of all the problem that we found and our proposal how to fix this problem. Inango is a software development company, and currently we have one project that created based on the ONOS, and we have 5 full-time developers that work mostly with ONOS. And during our work, we observed one issue. We observed that during ICMP-v6 packet flood, ONOS can lose information about links between switches. We succeed to reproduce this issue in small setup. We used setup with mininet network with 2 switches. We used that was both connected to the ONOS. And we generated ICMP-v6 flood from first host. And when we start this flood, link between switches disappear. So let me describe what actually happens with link. When we start flood with neighbor discovery packets, we have both neighbor discovery packets and link discovery packets that goes through same control open flow control channel to the ONOS. ONOS all incoming messages add to single dispatch queue, and in one process all messages added to dispatch queue, and in other thread these packets processed. And if dispatch queue is full, by default dispatch queue capable to contain 5,000 messages. And when dispatch queue is full, then reading from TCP socket is stopped. And when it's stopped, and when we have buffer in kernel full, system set TCP window size to 0 and stop reading packets at all. So actually we have the following package handling sequence. We have net thread that read messages from TCP channel. This thread add messages to the queue, and then other thread dispatcher process these messages. According to our investigation, reading 5,000 OpenFlow messages takes only 15 milliseconds, but processing them to allow reading from socket again take about 1.5 seconds in our setup. And in this moment, when reading disabled, we can lose LDP packets, and as a result, ONOS decides that link between switches disappear. We suggest to create several priority queues between reading and dispatching, just because reading is quick operation, and with these several queues, we can prioritize traffic that we don't want to lose. So,
sorry, can we pause for a second? This is Charles from ONF. So the problem you're seeing right here, it seems that it's pretty similar to one of the thing we have seen in one of our production network. So I want to make sure everyone is on the same page about what exactly the problem is. So first of all, what ONOS version are you using?
we worked on 1.12, but we tested that we have same issue with ONOS 2.0.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we've done several patches and very recently to offload the NDP packet processing to multi-thread. I'm not sure if you were actually testing with or without those patch. So what we are seeing in one of our production environment is that the NDP processing is actually blocking our DHCP thread, while in your case, your NDP processing is blocking your LODP packet. I think it's more or less the same cost, but it's just
I think
it turns out a different packet was blocked in these two cases. Sorry, Tom.
Right. So I think the
main issue that NDP packets actually blocks fully reading from OpenFlow control channel.
So,
yes.
Yeah, so sorry, let me break in a little bit just to comment on Charles's feedback. So I think, Charles, we kind of patched it at the surface level. The deployment folks that we're working with, they were considering making a set of priority queues kind of at a lower level, at a deeper level, which I think is what's being proposed in here. So I would not let the fact that we solved it at the packet processor level deter from potentially looking at introducing a priority queue mechanism inside at the dispatching level, so to speak, right? Rather than at the handler level, where basically this would be fixing it at the dispatcher level.
Oh, I'm not suggesting we should not do that. I'm just trying to figure out. I'm trying to clarify the problem and then make sure everyone understands the problem.
Got it. Yes, you're right, because basically today, as the mechanism exists, it's vulnerable to basically sabotage the entire dispatch. Everybody who participates in the dispatching sequence, regardless of packet types, can be sabotaged by a single inefficient packet handler. And
yes.
clearly,
and I'm also wondering if the patch we merged actually fixed the problem or not, if they have actually tested with or without that patch.
So we tested last time with ONOS version from Git 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, then you should probably have it, because the patch was merged 4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Into all branches above 112, actually.
So,
yeah.
And after call, we can recheck that it still appears for us.
Yeah. So, Nikolai, why don't you just go ahead, proceed?
Sure, maybe you can go ahead. But
yes.
We actually do have another proposal about LODP, but I'll talk about that once you finish. So please go ahead.
Of course. We suggest to create several queues between reading and processing. In this solution, we suggest never stop reading from control socket, but instead of this, explicitly drop packets that target to full queue. And with this solution, of course, we not able to classify all packets to decide to which queue we want to put it. And so we will have many packets that will go to default queue. We suggest to create stability tweak to store only control messages, so messages that not packet in type in dispatch backlog if these messages targeted to default queue. So about performance, we already tested our proposal on 1.12.
Hello, can you go back just one slide? Couple questions.
Yes.
You're proposing a drop of the last packet as opposed to drop newest packet as opposed to drop oldest packet. Do you see configuration options around both? I'll call it queue size.
Yes, we suggest to allow to configure everything, and I mention it later.
And have you looked at, if you do have different priority queues, assuming one queue, how you address the starvation problem, such that because all high priority messages are being processed, we don't get any low priorities?
I will say about it in 2 slides after this.
All right, excellent, thank you.
Okay, so it's just slide with information about when we experience issue, and with 20,000 package per second flood with ONOS 1.12, we lose link after 1 minute, and with our changes, we didn't observe link stability issues until ONOS start to work very slow because of memory consumption in host location provider. So let's describe fully how we suggest to read and process packets. First of all, according to our algorithm, we will move all old messages from dispatch backlog to default queue as it works currently. Then we classify incoming packet. If classification was made successfully, then we know target queue for packet. If we can't classify it, then packet go to default queue. So graphically, this will work with next steps. First of all, we move packets from backlog to default queue, then classify it. Then classified packets will go to specific queues, and all other packets will go to default queue. And as tweak, if default queue is full and we got not packet in message, then we will try to save it in backlog queue. For reading, we suggest to use round-robin algorithm. So we will read bulk of messages from first queue, then we will read bulk of messages from second, and so on till last queue, and then go again from first queue. So it's not actually priority queue, it's a queue for different types of packets.
How is message sequencing being handled? Sometimes when you're processing messages,
yes.
Okay.
Actually, this means that if messages of several types should go in order, then these messages should be targeted to same queue. So in one queue, messages order preserved. And this is why for default configuration, we filter out only LDP and BDDP packets to make sure that all other packets will go in proposed order. So graphically processing will look like this. Read bulk of messages from one queue, from second, and so on. So we propose the following configuration. We propose to create 8 queues that can be configured, 7 queues that we can configure 7 queue for which we can configure classifiers, 1 default queue where go all unclassified packets, and dispatch backlog to store control packets that targeted to default queue. We want to allow configuration size of each queue, count of messages that will be taken on read for each queue. We also suggest to allow to create classifiers for each OpenFlow agent. So for each switch, we can configure different classifiers. As default configuration, we used the following. We moved LDP and BDP packets to the first queue. First queue was set to size for 1000 messages. Default queue was kept to current size, and count of messages that we read during round robin algorithm from each queue is 100 messages.
I'm trying to understand. You said there's 7 priority queues.
Yes.
And I would argue they're classification queues, not really priority queues, but there's a default
yes.
queue, there's a default queue, a dispatch backlog queue, and an LLDP, BDP queue. That's 3.
So, yes, in default configuration, we used actually only 3 queues. One was configured to move to this queue LDP and BDP packets, and default queue was take all other packets.
Okay,
and 8 queues, it's just suggestion because we can easily configure static amount of queues, but it's a little tricky to create new queues on the fly.
So essentially, you're saying the the proposed configuration is that ONOS has 7 priority queues. You can use as many or as few as you want. Is that accurate? Because you're only using 3 in your example.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay. So these changes that we suppose we already tried it for ONOS 1.12. It took about 2000 with half lines of code. Most of code is for configuration, for ability to propagate this configuration for ONOS cluster. And we expect almost same changes for ONOS 2.0. We checked it by code. It should be mostly the same for places that we change it. Okay, so it's our proposal.
Are you providing any REST APIs or CLI that allows inspection of the queues in terms of KPIs, how many, the size of the queue, that type of thing?
Yes, we're going to provide possibility to configure all that I mentioned at runtime. So change size of queue, look at size of queue at runtime, configure classifiers, and so on.
So, right, so you could essentially create a monitor that shows how many items are in each queue as things are being processed, an external web application, for example.
So currently we have code that can for CLI and that can be used through REST API and for yes.
All right, thanks.
And this is really interesting. I like it because I mean we've been talking about having this sort of a mechanism before, just never prioritized it, so to speak. So I really like it. It would be really interesting to see the code. You wouldn't happen to have an example of a code, for example, for how this changes the packet processor. So from a packet processor, so when somebody registers a packet processor, they don't really, there's no difference, right? They just simply register a handler for a particular type of packet, and that's the same from application perspective, correct?
Sorry, can you repeat?
So there's from perspective of an application which wants to insert a handler for processing a packet, for them nothing changes, correct?
Yes. So basically all changes in mechanism for processing and additional configurations.
Right. So that's basically on a back end of the system.
Yes.
You mentioned that the classifier can be configured for each agent on a third bullet here. So how is that done? Is that done through a driver mechanism, or?
So for this we stored information also about agent IDs, and we are allowed to configure for specific agent ID.
I see. Okay.
Is that configuration available? Do you set that configuration via netconfig file, or just API CLI? In other words, can I create a?
I mean CLI, REST API CLI, yes.
But can I also, in my netconfig file, specify classifiers?
So I think we can discuss if it's required to implement.
Right.
Currently, no, it goes through CLI.
Okay.
This is really good. So you said you have the changes done and tested. So does that mean that you would be able to submit basically submit the code for review to get it soon?
Yes, we have tested code for 1.12, and if you're interested in our proposal, we will start porting it to 2.0, and it should take a little amount of time. Small amount.
I suspect we're going to need it against 1.15 as well, as that's an ATS.
Yeah, definitely. I would start with what you have for 1.12. Let me just ask a question to Charles. Charles, do you have, with the 1.12, do you have any concerns about how this might interact with some of the other changes heading for 1.12 for our deployment?
I don't think so. As long as we keep it configurable. By default, if you don't enable any of these, everything will just go into the SAM queue, right? So that should be okay.
Okay, good.
But I think we're interested in conflicts if it's not configured, or if it is configured too, right? If someone configures it with LLDP and BDP configuration, like they've done in their example, is that going to affect some of the other work going in?
Those two should be fine too. Those two are, as they mentioned, the order doesn't really matter. But for some other kind of packet, we need to be careful, right? For example, DHCP 4A messages, they have a specific order need to be processed in order, things like that. But LLDP and BDP should be fine. And actually, I want to make a comment about LLDP that, well, it's actually not strictly related to this, but it's pretty similar to one of the issue they're seeing. They're seeing a link disappearing out when the controller is processing a lot of packets, right? So actually, regarding that, we have a proposal and about changing our ways of discovery and links. So the thing is that in some of the cases, we see a problem that it's not a controller being too busy, but a switch. Instead, it's the switch being too busy to reply to any of those LDP packet or to packet in those LDP packet. When the switch is under a huge load of programming the flow entries, it could be very slow. And if the switch failed to report the LDP packet or packet in the packet to controller, the link will also eventually disappear. So what we're thinking is that the this timeout based link is like failure discovery. It's a little bit too I say that a little bit too fragile in especially at scale because there could be the controller not processing in time, or it could be the switch being too busy not to pack it in the DP packet. There'll be many I would say it's a fake event that caused the link disappear, and then link disappear in the threadless use case is a very serious problem because that's going to trigger recomputation of all the routes and all the available path, and we will compute the ECMP shortest path graph, and it will cause just a lot of trouble for us. So what we're thinking is that we want to kind of just use LDP for discovery, but not for link removal. Basically, we discover a link, and as long as the port never goes down, we don't remove those links. And we're going to do this with and also make it configurable. So basically, the default behavior will still be exactly the same as we do with LDP. So I think 3 seconds a packet, and if we miss 3 LDP packet, it's going to remove the link. But we're also going to have a configuration that kind of switch the mode to only use LDP for discovery and remove the link only when the port goes down.
So I like the idea of
eliminate the false alarm of the LDP timeout due to a busy switch, or the similar case here due to a busy controller.
I mean, I like the idea of if you've missed 3 of the last 10 LLDPs, call it down, something like that. I worry a little bit of just using it for discovery and then assume it's up unless I get a port down. What happens if someone quickly unplugs a cable and plugs it back into something else, and you miss the port up down, right?
But the port up down will still come. Port up down is generated by the switch immediately when you lose your.
I'm not doubting the switch generates it. I'm just doubting maybe ONOS misses it or something. I don't know. So I like the concept of I've gotten 7 out of the last 10. I like that.
We also thought about the other way. Someone quickly plug the cable and put it somewhere else, and ONOS missed the event, right? So in this case, we are going to still have a periodical kind of port status checking, and then maybe also periodically send an LDP. But this period will be way much longer than what we have today. Maybe it's a 10 or 30 second thing instead of the 3 second thing. And then typically in a normal case, we don't use LDP messages or we don't use the missing LDP packet to remove a link.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we can talk. It's a little orthogonal to this proposal, but
yeah. Let me get back onto Nikolai's proposal. So I just wanted to.
I do worry about event sequencing, right? I worry that people are going to get in trouble because LLDP and BDPP work. Someone may configure this for some other packet type, and all of a sudden things stop working because they did something they shouldn't. I think there's a risk there.
They should have the control for how they classify the packets, right? So as Nikolai said, so clearly that would be a wrong configuration if they classify packets that need to be sequenced in particular order to land in multiple different queues. That would be a problem.
It will be. I agree, and it is a configuration issue, but there is a risk that people will do that. People tend to try things and then go, "Oh, I wonder why they didn't work." But that's fine. It's an advanced configuration. I get that.
It's going to happen.
The other issue I'm wondering, have you guys tested this in clustering and how a clustered environment is or not affected by this implementation? Nikolai, that was kind of a question for you guys. Have you done a cluster test?
Sorry, can you repeat questions? I think I missed it.
No problem. Have you run your code in a ONOS clustered environment to understand how...
Yes. We tested it also in cluster environment, and we propagate classifiers configuration for ONOS cluster.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, because that would be kind of the only aspects I would think would be affected by clustering, is to make sure that the configuration is applied across all instances in the same way. Otherwise, clearly the queues are all separate.
Yep.
So I really like it. I just wanted to make sure that before we proceed with the specific plans on putting this into the ONOS code base, I wanted to make sure that there was no risk to our existing on-12 deployment. And so what Charles said makes sense. If it can be configured, we can leave it off, and basically the default behavior would be more or less the same. I think actually the deployment would probably benefit from configuring this mechanism as well. So
yeah, I would recommend, if we have a regression test suite, to run their code change through that before the commit, just to catch it before even somehow catch it, as well as run it with the SIBA Volta use cases to make sure it doesn't affect that.
Makes sense. That's a good idea. But I would proceed on 1.12. And then I think as it's in 1.12, we would probably should then migrate it to, like you said, to 2.0 and 1.15, or potentially 2.1 and 1.15. This is hold on a second. Let me raise here. And we're nearing on the 2.1 release. This should be okay to go into 2.1.
And you're going to want to have your production customer check it against their stuff too, before it probably is submitted to 1.2 tree.
Well, so before the 1.12 you talking about?
Yeah, before the 1.12 tree. Just because if it destabilizes the 1.12 tree for them, they're not going to be happy.
Yeah, so this is where I will leave it to Pierre and Charles how they want to sequence that. We have a test lab where we could test this probably.
We're narrowing in on an RC for them. And my suggestion would be to do the RC first, and then do this, and then so we have a baseline. But like,
okay,
that's up to Charles and Sarah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we have. So sorry, Nikolai. We're trying to figure out what would be to make sure that we get this into the code bases where it needs to be, but also at the same time to minimize risk. Clearly, I'm not terribly actually concerned to the risk of the 2.1 because that's not something that's in production. That's something we can always patch afterwards. So 2.1 is no problem. 1.15 should be no problem. It's the 1.12 is actually probably the most riskiest. I wonder if it would be possible actually to maybe start with 1.15.
Actually, I was going to suggest start with 2.1 because
2.1?
We're going to do a full QA sweep on that for the release.
Yes. How difficult would this be to try this on 2.1 code base?
Oh, so it should not be too hard task to port it to one code base. So first target for us should be 2.1. Yes.
Yeah, that would be best because first of all, that would get it into the newest code base, and then we can backport it probably to
yes.
Yeah, we start with 2.1, and then if there are some issues caused by this patch, we will probably discover it early in our release QA run.
Exactly. Right.
And yeah, so what is the RC deadline for 2.1?
We were looking at kind of the end of the week, beginning of next week, based on what's going on with the UI work, but I'm not married to that schedule. If we need to slip it for an important feature, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone actively waiting for 2.1, so.
Okay.
Because if the code is done, if it can be reasonably quickly ported to 2.1, we can make sure we go through the review process in an expedited way to make sure it doesn't sit there idle, and then we can QA test it as part of our preparation for the 2.1 release. So if you can do that, Nikolai, that would be awesome.
Okay. So
I would also recommend in the port, I think we do need configuration in netconfig, so that when I establish a configuration to ONOS, I can set up this queuing mechanism.
Yes, that would be nice.
Mhm.
But that can be added on.
Yeah, I was going to say, we can add that too. That's fine.
okay.
So right now, it's configured statically. It's configured in the code.
I thought it was CLI.
Oh, CLI. Okay. Oh, then it'll be simple to add the netconfig stuff.
Yes.
That sounds good. This is actually really nice.
So, I just noticed Pierre is sending a message saying that he would push the 1.12 patch onto Gary anyway if the code is already there. But
Okay.
we will probably review that, but we probably won't merge it. So if the code is already there for 1.12, we can push that to Gary and we can have an early review. And then at the same time, they're going to traffic that to 2.1. So we'll probably start with 2.1, but the code review can start now.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
Okay.
This is exciting. Thank you, Nikolai.
Thank you.
So is there anything you need from us other than the code review, timely code review?
So then we'll start to checking how to work through your tools, and we start pushing it as quick as possible.
Perfect. Thank you. Ray, you were going to say?
I was just going to say, once the patch is in to 1.12 or 2.1, we can run the STC integration test suite against it and see how that looks on various size clusters also.
Okay. Yep. And one question: to whom can I write if I'll have any questions?
You can write to TST or the ONOS dev list.
Yeah, ONOS dev is probably the best.
Yeah, write to ONOS dev because we actively monitor.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Okay, then I think that's all.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much again. Looking forward to seeing the code. Thanks for the good questions, everybody. We'll see you in, right now, probably in 2 weeks, unless we come up with an urgent topic, in which case we may schedule one next week. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Nikolai.
Bye-bye, everybody. Take care.
Bye.